Welcome, everybody, to this edition of Attention Talk Video. I'm your host, ADHD and Attention Coach Jeff Copper. We're here with Dr. Roberto Olivardi, one of my favorite guests on Attention Talk Radio and Attention Talk Video. And our topic today is cannabis use and its long-term effects. Cannabis seems to be a substance it's in vogue right now. It's in fashion, but it does have some long-term effects to it. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So first, we have to understand that we really haven't even seen the crux of the research, because we are seeing cannabis at a state now where it's legalized. We're seeing THC levels higher than they've ever been. We're seeing people who use it more frequently, and we're seeing younger people than ever who are using it. I mean, the National Institute of Drug Abuse found that up to 6.4% of seniors in high school use marijuana on a daily basis.
Wow.
So when we have all of those factors, we're going to see a decade from now probably even more disturbing research than what we're seeing right now. And the research that we see right now on developing brains is that there is a neurological impact of cannabis on the brain in terms of it's literally changing the sort of architecture of how nerve cells communicate with each other, and really impacts the executive functions of the brain, which for people with ADHD are already issues with. That we see a long-term impact of decreased motivation, decreased inhibition, decreased working memory, concentration, all of the things that people might be trying to self-medicate in the first place, but as well as emotion regulation. And I have to say, I mean, we know that ADHD doesn't travel alone, that we see high comorbidities with depression, with anxiety, with bipolar disorder. And what's also important to understand is when people are self-medicating with cannabis, it means that we might not be adequately seeing or assessing or diagnosing potentially other mental health issues that might be coming along with ADHD, namely mood disorders like depression and bipolar disorder, which can be incredibly impairing if somebody doesn't have treatment for it. And so we know that now if somebody is using cannabis, that they're eroding, in a sense, their brain's ability to regulate emotions, which if they have an underlying mood disorder in addition to the ADHD, is worsening that mood disorder, and it just becomes a spiral. Contrary to popular belief, you can be addicted to cannabis. Now, maybe in the 60s, we didn't see that as much because THC levels weren't as high and people weren't using it as frequently and as young. But about 18% of adolescents have cannabis use disorder, which is a physiological dependency on cannabis. 9% of adults who use cannabis have a cannabis use disorder. I should preface by saying 18% of adolescents who use cannabis have a cannabis use disorder.
So I want to comment on that because I hear that a lot. And one of my way I describe this is 1980, I went in to get an EKG and some a stress test done because I had asthma at the time. I drive back to my high school and the nurses on the step went to take me to the hospital. This happened a couple times after I had EKGs. And then finally in 1998, I went to my doctor's office. He said, we're going to do an EKG. And I said, but you're going to want to run me to the hospital and I'm fine. And literally I was calling back to my house trying to get a fax of what my EKG, and sure enough, he did an EKG, and I got to take you to the hospital. He agreed to let me go, and I drove to the hospital, and I walk in, it was loaded that day. People were in the hall, but they had a room for me, and I go in, and I'm sitting there, and the doctor's looking at me, and I said, what's the deal on this? He said, well, your normal EKG looks like you're having a heart attack right now, so your normal is everybody else is abnormal. And I'm saying that is because when it comes to cannabis and addiction, I hear this all the time. We're all different. And I can see how some people might become addicted to it while others might not. So you can't have a blanket statement. That's the first thing. Second thing is, Dr. Olivardi, you've talked a lot about the human brain when it's developing up to age 27, it's developing. And I'm hearing is that cannabis is actually impairing that development. And if you have ADHD and it's having a negative impact on that, and right now we have THC levels that are much higher than what they were a long time ago. So we don't have any longitudinal studies right now. We can only infer, but the concern really is it might feel okay right now and you might rationalize, but long-term, there's going to be a lot more long-term consequences. Because ADHD is an executive functioning impairment, and this is impairing the deficit of executive functioning, it's going to, logically, one would think it's going to be worse long-term. Am I misrepresenting that?
No, that's correct. And you brought up another great point, Jeff, is that, when you talk about the physical part, I mean, there are physical consequences too, in terms of cardiac issues, of, lung issues and things like that. But to keep in mind that, like any substance, especially with cannabis, which is so widely used now, that a lot of my patients who have ADHD might say, well, everybody's doing it and not everybody's addicted to it. Well, that's true. Lots of people drink alcohol and not everybody's an alcoholic. But we have to also understand the sort of intersection of what we know about an ADHD brain and an ADHD system. Because even if you're talking about resting heart rate, I mean, for some people with ADHD, their baseline could be higher. And then if you're using a substance that might be increasing it even more, that's even more the case. One of the debates in the field is whether cannabis use could cause psychosis. And that was something that even I was a little bit skeptical. Like, is it just that people who are prone to develop psychosis just tend to gravitate to cannabis? Like, what's the sort of chicken and the egg kind of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out that not everybody who uses cannabis is going to either develop psychosis or have a psychotic episode. However, the groups that are most vulnerable to are groups that have certain enzymes in a gene called COMT, stands for catecholomethyltransferase, the long name, which is a dopamine inactivating enzyme. And it comes in two forms, MET and VAL are the variants and the people who have two VAL variants are the ones that are most predisposed to psychotic episodes when using cannabis. Well, guess what an ADHD brain tends to have is that COMT enzyme, which is dopamine inactivating, which makes sense because an ADHD
Mm-hmm.
brain we know has dopamine deficits and is more likely to have both of those VAL variants. So this is a population that could be more vulnerable than the typical population.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want people to get, and why I love doing these videos with you is just to educate people, because I'm not saying everybody who uses it is going to have this effect or that effect, but be aware that you are gambling with your neurological health and your physical health, and doing a substance that just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean it's good for you.
And when it comes to self-regulation, we talk about the two-level brain. You have the automatic brain, the dopamine-seeking brain, the lizard brain, and you have the executive functioning brain. This is really, really effortful, because if you're going to engage this brain, you've got to override the urge. And one of the exercises I have clients do is I want you to notice your urges all day, and they'll come back like with one or two. I'm like, you have the urge to pee, you have the urge to drink, you have the urge to correct somebody. If you focus on urges, you're acting on urges all day long. And ADHD people are predisposed to listen to the urge more and more and more and more. And part of this video is that it's easy to rationalize that urge. If when I'm coaching people with ADHD, one of the great moments is when they can begin to see the argument and the fight that's going on between the two. Like, the thinking brain goes, I shouldn't do that, but they begin to see the rationalization to get to where they're going. Once they begin to see that, they're starting to kick this brain in to begin. It's still hard, but the point really is this video is to educate you, because the primitive brain is going to find ways to do this because it feels good right now. And people with ADHD, there's two kinds of time, now and not now. And in order to override that, sometimes some of you will not pay attention to this video. Some of you will take this as fact and go, oh my God, I got to do something about it, which goes back to self-awareness, which is an executive function, which is real important to kind of move forward. So our hope today is that we could give you some insight on the backside so that you can make an informed decision for yourself. Any last comments on this, Dr. Oliver? We think we covered it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we covered it well.
Thanks for coming on the show. For those that are new to our channel, please hit the subscribe button. We release a tip each week. For those that have been long-term listeners, please, what are your thoughts on this? What are your experiences? We appreciate that. Also, if you'd like to help support our channel, please hit the thanks button. With that, we hope you've enjoyed this edition of Attention Talk Video. Take care.